but they weren't sure, and they did not want to have an international scandal by picking up the wrong man. And one day, Mr. Eichmann came home on the bus in the dusk of the evening, and he had a large bouquet of flowers. And one of the Jewish men said to the other, "What in the world would a man with his income and 5 children spend that much money on a bouquet of flowers?" After a little thought, they decided that it was because it was his wedding anniversary, his 25th wedding anniversary. They then made arrangements to pick him up, and they grabbed him as he got off the bus in the dusk one evening. The man who grabbed him said, "I thought he had a gun." Actually, he had a flashlight in his pocket, a flashlight he used to see his way from the bus to his house. Adolf Eichmann talked plenty to the people, and he was interviewed for several hundred days before the trial and the execution. Spoke freely about what had happened and who was involved. His children called Martin Bormann Uncle Martin, although he used the name of Bauer rather than Bormann. They were closely allied. In fact, in the time when Adolf Eichmann was in prison, his son went to Germany. He took a job as a seaman on a ship. He got to Germany. He left the ship and went to the capital to talk to the prosecutors to point out something that he thought would enable him to get his father out of trouble. And that was the fact that he knew for a certainty that Martin Bormann was alive. Now this, in spite of all the news articles that have talked about the identification of Martin Bormann by his bridge work. Well, as a fact, Martin Bormann had very good tooth. He was only 34 years old at that time, and it was Hitler that had the lousy teeth. They actually, as it says in this book about Martin Bormann, all they had was a sketch by a Nazi dental assistant. They didn't actually have an x-ray. But it's very unlikely that they could identify Martin Bormann from the dental information that they had. And Horst Eichmann went there at great danger to himself, hoping that he could get the Germans to defend his father, who was in a very secure prison in Israel. But the Germans weren't interested. They didn't care what happened to Adolf Eichmann, and as many of you know, he was later tried, executed, and his ashes spread to the four winds. Now that gives you an idea. In the case of Martin Bormann, his oldest son became a Catholic priest. He later married a nun who had given up her vows, as he did, and he applied for a job as a school teacher in Bavaria. He was not hired on the fact that the mayor refused to approve it, but he is, or was at the time of the last report, teaching school under an assumed name in southern Germany. There are many others. There are 4 others of the children of Mr. Eichmann. Any of you who are interested, there's a very, very good book on the capture and trial of Adolf Eichmann by Moshe Perlman, a very detailed book that fits in with the other book on the aftermath by Ladislav Fargo, which is completely devoted to Martin Bormann, what he did before he left Germany, what he did and what he is doing as the time of this book was published in 1974, when Bormann was 74 years old on July 17th. It goes into detail how he manipulated Herr Hitler, how he kept the other Nazis doing what he wanted them to do and the way he wanted it to do. And according to this book, he's still doing that with the many Nazis who are holed up in South America. According to this report, Mr. Perón, then the leader of Argentina, requested a portion of the treasure that Bormann had brought to Germany for taking care of. The last account, in 1974, he was still the leader, although he was becoming senile and was being taken care of by 4 sisters of a certain Catholic order. This is one of the most fascinating books that I have ever read. because it's about a man who became an international figure after he left Germany. Very few people even knew him during the time that he was directing affairs for Hitler. But he has become even probably more famous than Hitler since the time he disappeared from the bunker in Berlin. Now, Martin Bormann took enough money with him to have sizable investments, to be entertained in the best homes as a guest, and he has written, and according to Mr. Farrago, who said he saw some of his notes, and in fact he was asked to edit them in hopes of publication, that he spoke of how they had a good time at the parties, the various places. They talked about the things that they did. And to go back a little bit, also both Mr. Farrago and the man who wrote the book about Eichmann tell of the early get-togethers in Berlin before the war got near the close. It said Heinrich Hoffmann, who was Hitler's photographer, usually showed up a little tipsy. Hitler was always late, and various others of the people were doing a great deal of drinking because of the tremendous pressure on them as a result of what was happening. What most of you know is the final solution, the fact that they were killing people. I remember when we approached the first concentration camp, the first we really had known about them except by rumor. Back in the days when I was the head of the city of Middletown, Ohio, we had a bond drive, and there were 3 movie stars there: Hugh Herbert, Fred Astaire, and a young lady by the name of Ilona Massey, a Hungarian dancer who became an actress. And this morning, as we were next to the concentration camp, lying out in the field, and my sergeant said, "What in the world is that coming across the field?" There was 3 men with a white flag. One of them was a short man, Dr. Bela Fabian, who I came to know very well later, who wrote a book about the Catholic official who spent much of his time in the embassy in Hungary. Dr. Bela Fabian started to tell me all the things about himself. He was a member of the Hungarian Parliament, and he was president of the prisoner of war camp, I had heard so many stories from people during that period of the war up to then that I was a little unlikely to accept it. Finally, he said, "Did you know Ilona Massey?" The only movie star lady that I had ever met. And I said, "You're in." So then I introduced him to the press to give him the first-hand account of a German concentration camp. And I'm sure all of you that are listening to this program tonight have read or heard about the things that happened in those camps. The final statement about Dr. Bela Fabian, several years later when I was stationed in Washington, I went to New York to visit him. He said, "Tonight you can sleep in Miss Massey's bed," and said, "This is her apartment." He has since died, and I lost a very good friend. That gives you a little bit of some of the details that go along with the fact of the final solution, Martin Bormann, Adolf Eichmann, and the other thing. Now, 1924, when Hitler was arrested, one of his close friends was a man who was his personal photographer, Heinrich Hoffmann. Now, I remember Heinrich Hoffmann best because when he was taken to Bad Aussee to be questioned about the art that was taken by the Nazis who collected it for Hitler, the largest collection of art, valuable art ever assembled in one place. He was then the Reich Minister of Art. And he said, oh yes, there was some German art, government art, and other things stored in a disused salt mine in Aldaussee. Well, if that disused mine was in fact a disused mine, 132 people that I knew there who worked there were doing something miraculous, because they were taking salt out of that mine up until a few days before we got there, and they started taking it out again as soon as I authorized them to open the mine.